My own son-in-law looked me in the eye, called me mama, and then shut that cabin door with fire licking at the walls. "You're not getting out of this alive," he said. He thought my age made me weak, that the world would never hear my side of the story. But what he didn't know was I had proof, and when they came back, I was still standing. "You know, darling, the deepest cuts in life don't always come from enemies. Strangers can wound you, sure, but the worst pain comes from those you once held close, the ones you trusted enough to call family." That's the kind of pain that doesn't just scratch the surface. It burrows deep into the heart and stays there. That's what betrayal feels like, and I know it too well. Your mama's husband, my son-in-law. I once thought of him almost like a son. The first time she brought him home, I remember he was all charm, polite, shook my hand firmly, and looked me in the eyes. He even helped carry in the groceries without being asked. I thought to myself, well, isn't that nice? My daughter found herself a good man. I had prayed for that, you know. After all, what mother doesn't want her child to be loved and cared for? Over the years, I cooked him meals, stitched buttons back onto his shirts, and even slipped him $20 here and there when times were tough. He'd call me Ma, and it would warm me straight through. I thought maybe this is how my family grows, by adding more hearts to it. But hearts, my darling, can be deceitful things. I began to notice little cracks, things most folks might brush off. The way his smile never quite reached his eyes. The way he held on to his phone like it was a lifeline, stepping out to talk in whispers. He'd come home late sometimes, smelling faintly of smoke and liquor, though he'd laugh it off and say it was just a long day at work. I wanted to believe him. Lord knows I wanted to believe him. But the Lord also gives us instincts, and mine told me something wasn't right. Still, betrayal, when it comes, doesn't knock gently. It slams the door in your face. That night at the cabin, the one your granddad built with his own 2 hands back when his back was strong and his heart was full, I thought we were just gathering as a family. The children ran around chasing fireflies. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke. I'd packed pies, jars of jam, and quilts to keep everyone warm. My bones were tired, but my heart was light, because being with family always gave me strength. After supper, your mama was upstairs with you kids, tucking you in. That's when he asked me, his voice smooth as honey, "Ma, could you help me out in the back cabin? The stove's acting up, and you know more about it than I do." I didn't question him. Why would I? He was family. I wiped my hands on my apron, grabbed a lantern, and followed him. The night was quiet, too quiet. I remember the crunch of gravel under our feet, the way the shadows of the trees stretched long and thin. My chest felt heavy, but I pushed it aside. When we stepped inside the cabin, he moved faster than I could blink. The door slammed, and before I could turn, I heard the scrape of the lock sliding into place. I laughed at first, thinking he was playing some kind of silly prank. But when I turned, his face wasn't playful. It was stone cold. His eyes were dark, set with something I can only call hunger, not for food, not for love, but for power. I rattled the knob. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice already shaking. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he lit a match. The tiny flame reflected in his eyes, and for a moment I didn't recognize him. He was no longer the man I'd once prayed over at Thanksgiving, or the one who had rocked my granddaughter to sleep in his arms. He was a stranger wearing a familiar face. "You've seen too much," he finally said. His voice was low and flat, like he'd already decided my fate. "You know things you shouldn't. I can't let you ruin this for me." My knees went weak. I gripped the edge of the table, the wood digging into my palm. "Ruin what?" I whispered. He didn't explain, but I already knew. I had seen the papers, bank accounts with numbers that made my head spin, names I didn't recognize, and transfers that smelled of crime and greed. I'd tucked them away, thinking maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe it wasn't as dark as it seemed, but he knew I had the truth, and for men like him, truth is a dangerous thing. I wanted to scream, to call out for help, but the night was thick and the walls too strong. He tossed the match onto a rag soaked with gasoline, and the flames leapt up like hungry wolves. The heat hit my face, searing, stealing the air from my lungs, and then he walked away, just like that. No hesitation, no glance back, as if I were nothing but a shadow he'd stepped over. That's when betrayal carved its deepest mark. Not in the fire itself, but in the realization that a man I had loved like a son, a man I had trusted with my daughter's happiness, had decided I was worth more to him dead than alive. I pounded on the door, called his name, and begged him to think of the children upstairs and of the woman who loved him. My voice cracked, my throat was raw, but he never turned. The crunch of his boots faded into the night, leaving me alone with the roar of flames and the sting of smoke. Darling, I've lived through many things, losing babies too soon, saying goodbye to your granddad before I was ready, nights when the cupboards were bare and I had to make miracles out of scraps. But nothing ever hurt like knowing betrayal had come not from a stranger, but from inside my own family. I pressed my forehead against the cool floorboards, tears streaming down my face, and for the first time in many years, I prayed not for strength, not for patience, but for survival. Lord, I whispered through the smoke, don't let my story end here, not like this. That's when I remembered the loose board in the corner, the one your granddad had never quite nailed down right. My hand shook as I crawled toward it, my body weak, my lungs screaming for air. But betrayal, as sharp as it was, lit a fire of its own inside me, not of destruction, but of determination. If he thought I'd go quietly, he didn't know me at all. And that, my darling, is how I learned what betrayal really feels like. Not just the lock on a cabin door, not just the heat of flames rising around you, but the realization that love can be twisted into something deadly. It leaves a scar, one that never truly fades. Even now, as I sit here with your small hand in mine, I can still hear the echo of that lock clicking shut. But I survived it, and that is a story for another night. The flames grew so fast I could hear the wood groaning, snapping like bones under too much weight. Smoke curled upward, thick and black, stinging my eyes until tears streamed down my cheeks. My lungs clawed for air, but each breath dragged smoke deeper inside me, making me cough and wheeze. My body wanted to give up, to collapse right there on the floor, but something stronger held me. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was the memory of you children sleeping upstairs in the other cabin. Maybe it was God himself whispering, "Not yet, child, not yet." I pressed my palm against the floorboards, the wood hot under my skin. I could feel the fire eating its way closer, the crackle so loud it was like 1,000 whispers of death around me. That's when I remembered the loose board in the corner. I had seen your had trip over it once, back when the cabin was still new and smelled of fresh pine. He never got around to fixing it, always saying, "I'll get to it next weekend." Funny how a man's procrastination can turn into a woman's salvation. I crawled, every inch of me screaming. My knees ached, my joints felt like rusted hinges, but I pushed forward. I could feel my apron catching sparks, the fabric smoldering. I slapped at it with my hands, burning my palms, but I kept moving. I couldn't let myself stop. The floor was slick with something. I realized it was the gasoline he had spilled. It soaked into my skirt, my hands, and my knees, and every spark felt like a threat waiting to ignite me. I whispered to myself, "Come on, girl, don't you dare quit now." When I reached the corner, I clawed at the board with my fingernails, the wood splintering into my skin. My fingers bled, but I didn't care. I wedged them under the edge and pulled with everything I had left. At first, it didn't budge. My arms shook, my shoulders screamed, and I thought maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe this was the end. But then I remembered the faces of my children, my grandchildren, you. The thought of never holding your small hand again lit a strength in me that fire couldn't touch. With one last heave, the board cracked loose, leaving just enough space for me to squeeze through. Beneath was dirt, cold and damp compared to the heat raging above me. I dropped down, the fall jarring my bones. My chest slammed into the ground, knocking the air from me, but I rolled onto my side and gulped what little clean air I could find. The crawl space was narrow, dark, and filled with cobwebs that clung to my face and hair. My hands shook as I pushed myself forward, dragging my body inch by inch. Above me, the floor groaned and roared as the fire ate it alive. I could feel ash and embers falling onto my back, burning little holes through my blouse. The smell of smoke was so thick it coated my tongue, bitter as death. At one point, the heat grew so intense I thought I'd be baked alive down there, buried under the cabin like a forgotten relic. My arms gave out and I lay still for a moment, the dirt cool against my cheek. I thought about your granddad then, his laugh, the way he'd hold me close when the world seemed too much. I thought about how I'd promised him years ago that I'd keep this family together no matter what. And I realized I couldn't keep that promise lying down in the dirt. So I dug my elbows in and pulled again. My nails tore, my arms shook, and my whole body begged me to stop. But I didn't. I crawled until I saw the faintest shimmer of moonlight slipping through a gap in the foundation. That light was hope, small and fragile, but enough to make me keep moving. When I finally reached the opening, I used my last ounce of strength to shove myself out. The night air hit me like a miracle, cold and sharp, filling my lungs with life. I coughed so hard I thought I'd split in two, but it was the sweetest breath I'd ever taken. I rolled onto the ground, grass cool under my burning skin. Behind me, the cabin was a monster of fire roaring into the sky, sparks flying up to meet the stars. I lay there watching it, the glow reflecting in my tears, and I realized just how close I had come to being swallowed whole. But I wasn't gone, I was still here, and with every ragged breath, I felt that truth sink deeper. He had tried to silence me, but he had failed. For a long time I couldn't move. My body trembled, my lungs burned, and my skin stung where the fire had kissed it. But slowly, I pushed myself up onto my knees. I looked at the cabin, at the flames consuming it, and I whispered to myself, "You'll regret this. You'll regret underestimating me. Because betrayal, my darling, may have tried to bury me in fire, but survival dug me out of the dirt and set me back on my feet." And as I sat there, trembling in the cool night, I knew one thing for certain. I had more than just life left in me. I had proof. Proof he could never imagine I still held. Proof that would bring him down. But that is the next part of the story. When a man betrays you like that, darling, you don't just walk away with burns on your skin. You walk away with burns on your soul. But here's the thing about me. I've never been one to sit quiet when something is wrong. Even when the world wanted me to fold, I always had a little corner of strength tucked away, like a secret I kept for myself. And in this case, that secret was proof. You see, your mama's husband thought I was just some old woman, past my prime, too fragile and too foolish to notice the things going on under my roof. He saw me knitting, humming hymns, and baking pies, and he thought my mind was as soft as my hands. But what he didn't realize was that while these hands were wrinkled, they had also held more than babies. They had balanced checkbooks, scrubbed floors, buried loved ones, and carried the weight of a family on their shoulders. My eyes may have been tired, but they were sharp, and I saw things. It started years before the fire, little things slipping through the cracks, strange envelopes arriving in the mail, thicker than any letter ought to be, with return addresses that didn't make sense. Trips, he said, were for business, but never seemed to match the company he worked for. I wasn't nosy, but I was watchful, and when you've lived as long as I have, you learn that when the air smells of smoke, fire is never far behind. One afternoon, I found a stack of papers carelessly left in the desk drawer at the lake house. I wasn't looking for trouble, but when you're dusting and your eye catches numbers too big to make sense, numbers with more zeros than I'd ever seen in my lifetime, you pause. Bank accounts in places I'd only ever read about in the paper, shell companies with names that sounded like they belonged to ghosts, money moving back and forth like a tide too strong to be honest. I remember sitting there with those papers in my lap, my heart pounding like it did the first time your granddad kissed me, only this wasn't love, it was dread. I didn't know the whole picture, but I knew enough to see it was rotten. Men don't hide billions in shadows if the money was earned clean. I could have told your mama right then, but she was so happy in those days. Her smile had finally come back after so many hard years, and I couldn't bear to snatch it away with suspicions that might have been wrong. So I kept quiet, but I didn't forget. Instead, I did something he never imagined I would. I made copies. It wasn't easy. My old hand shook as I fed each paper into the copy machine at the library, glancing over my shoulder, worried someone might ask questions. My heart raced like a thief's, though the only thing I was stealing was the truth. When the copies came out, I folded them carefully, tucking them into an envelope I sealed tight, and then I hid them. Where, you ask? Not in a bank, not in a safe. He'd sniff those out in a heartbeat. No, I tucked them away in a place no man of his sort would ever look. Between the pages of my Bible, right there in the book of Psalms. The spine was worn, the leather cracked, but inside it was strong, holding words of comfort, and for me, words of justice. Every Sunday when I held that Bible in my hands, he thought I was just reading scripture. He didn't know I was also holding his undoing. That Bible went everywhere with me, from my bedside table to the pew at church. Folks probably thought it was just a sign of devotion, and in part it was. But it was also my vault, my shield. The Lord's word wrapped around the truth of a crooked man's empire. The night he locked me in that cabin, I think he suspected I had seen too much. That's why he thought the fire would erase me, erase my voice. But here's the lesson he forgot. Fire can burn paper, but it can't burn memory, and I had both, proof in my Bible and proof etched into my mind. When I stumbled out of that crawl space, coughing up smoke and tears, I clutched at my chest not just for breath, but for reassurance that I still remembered every detail, every figure, every name. My body was weak, but my mind was sharp. In my Bible, my safe little secret was waiting for me back home. I can still see it in my mind, the worn pages, the underlined verses, the envelope pressed so snug it looked like part of the book. Inside were the keys to everything, account numbers, false identities, and trails of money flowing like rivers across oceans, proof that would make the strongest walls around him crumble, and oh, darling, don't think for a second I didn't feel fear. I was terrified. My hand shook whenever I even thought of opening those pages. If he found out, if he so much as suspected, well, the cabin proved what he was capable of. But courage isn't the absence of fear. It's walking forward while your knees are knocking, and I knew I had to keep walking because the truth was bigger than my fear. For days after the fire, I moved quietly like a shadow. I acted the fool, nodding when he spoke, keeping my lips shut tight. He thought he had scared me into silence. He thought I was too broken, too old, and too weary to stand in his way. But inside, I held a fire of my own, not the kind that burns wood and flesh, but the kind that burns lies to ash. I knew I couldn't strike right away. A snake cornered too soon can still bite. I had to wait, gather myself, and make sure the truth was in safe hands before I let the world see it. That Bible stayed tucked by my bedside, close enough to reach for in the dark, and every night I whispered to myself, "Hold steady, the time will come." And the time did come, darling, but that's another piece of this tale. For now I want you to remember this. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a gun or a fist or even fire. Sometimes it's the quiet hands of a woman, wrinkled and worn, holding onto the truth when the whole world thinks she's too small, too weak, or too old. He locked me in a burning cabin, thinking I had nothing, but what I had was more dangerous to him than any flame. I had proof. There comes a time, darling, when silence turns heavy. I carried that envelope in my Bible like a stone in my chest, waiting for the right moment. Patience is something a woman learns with age. We wait for babies to be born, for crops to grow, for husbands to come home safe from work. But there's a difference between patience and fear, and I wasn't going to let fear keep me prisoner in my own life. After the fire, he looked at me with those hollow eyes, cold as river stones, and he thought I was broken. He thought the smoke had stolen my voice, that I'd tremble in some corner until the day I died. But I played my part. I smiled small, kept my words few, and shuffled around like my bones were too tired to carry weight. He mistook my quiet for weakness. That was his mistake. What he didn't see was what I was doing behind closed doors. I'd sit at the kitchen table, late at night when the house was still, the ticking clock my only companion. I'd spread out the copies, run my fingers over the names and numbers until they were etched into me like scripture. I knew them by heart, the accounts, the shell companies, the offshore trails. I didn't understand every detail, but I understood enough to know it was blood money, and I wasn't the only one who needed to know. The first step was trust, and trust is a hard thing when betrayal has cut you so deep. But I thought of your mama, your little hands, and the way your eyes looked at me without doubt or suspicion. I couldn't leave this burden for you to stumble upon one day like a snake in the grass. I needed to place it in hands strong enough to fight but pure enough not to use it for greed. So I went to Sheriff Daniels. He was an old friend of your granddad's, a man with a back bent by years but eyes still sharp with justice. I remember the way he looked at me when I walked into that station, Bible clutched tight against my chest. He rose from his chair, gentle as ever, and said, "Ma'am, are you all right?" And Lord help me, I broke down right there. My voice cracked as I told him everything, from the night of the fire to the envelope hidden in Psalms. He didn't laugh. He didn't look at me like I was some scene. An old woman spinning tales. He listened, every word sinking into him like nails into wood. When I finally slid that envelope across his desk, my hands trembling, he picked it up as if it were dynamite. He didn't even open it right away. He just nodded slowly and said, "We'll handle this, but you need to be ready, ma'am. Once this door opens, there's no shutting it." I nodded. My heart was steady even if my body shook. I've lived long enough hiding truths. I told him, it's time the truth sees daylight. The weeks that followed were a storm. Federal men in dark suits came asking questions, whispering words I'd only ever heard on the evening news. Fraud, laundering, embezzlement. I didn't understand all of it, but I understood enough. My son-in-law had built an empire of lies, a house of cards balanced on billions that didn't belong to him, and I had just given them the wind to blow it all down. When they came for him, it wasn't quiet. Sirens cut through the night, red and blue lights flashing against the windows. I stood on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, and watched them lead him away in handcuffs. For a moment, his eyes met mine, and in them I saw not fear, not shame, but fury. Fury that an old woman, one he thought too weak to matter, had undone him. I won't lie to you, darling. I shook, my knees wobbled, and I gripped the railing to keep from falling. Because even when justice comes, it doesn't erase the scars of betrayal. But standing there, watching him shoved into the back of that cruiser, I felt something else, too, relief. For once, I could breathe without smoke in my lungs. The trial was long and messy, filled with men in suits arguing over numbers and laws. I sat on that witness stand, Bible in my lap, and told the truth plain as bread on the table. They tried to trip me up and tried to make me look small, but I held steady. I'd been underestimated before, and I wasn't about to let them strip me of my voice now. When the verdict finally came, guilty on every count, I didn't cheer, I didn't clap. I just closed my eyes and whispered a prayer of thanks, because justice isn't about gloating. It's about setting things right, even if it takes every ounce of strength you have left. And let me tell you something, child. Justice doesn't just punish the wicked. It protects the innocent. With him gone, your mama and you children were safe. His empire crumbled, his billions were seized, and his shadow lifted from over our home. But more than that, justice gave me back my dignity. He had tried to erase me, to turn me into ashes and silence. Instead, I stood as living proof that age doesn't make you powerless. Wrinkles don't mean weakness. In truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of rising up through the smoke. That night, after it was all over, I sat alone in the quiet of my house. The clock ticked, the refrigerator hummed, and outside the crickets sang their steady song. I opened my Bible, fingers tracing the worn leather, and for the first time in months, I took out that envelope. It was empty now, the papers locked away in evidence, but I kept the envelope tucked there still. A reminder, I whispered to myself, you tried to burn me down, but I came out of the fire carrying proof, and proof brought you to your knees. So, darling, whenever the world tries to tell you that you're too small, too weak, or too old, you remember this. Even the quietest hands can hold justice. Even the most tired voice can speak truth loud enough to shake the earth. That's what I did, and I'd do it again if it meant protecting the ones I love. You know, darling, life has a way of marking you. Every scar on these old hands, every wrinkle on this face, every gray strand in my hair, they're not just signs of age. They're stories, some of pain, some of joy, all of survival. Folks spend their lives chasing after riches, power, or praise, but in the end, what matters is what you leave behind in the hearts of those who loved you. That's the real treasure, the kind that can't be stolen, burned, or buried. When the dust settled after the trial, I found myself sitting here in this same chair, in this same little house, listening to the tick of the clock and the whisper of the wind through the curtains. For a while I thought the silence might swallow me whole. No more sirens, no more lawyers, no more fire creeping at my heels. Just quiet. But quiet isn't emptiness, child. Quiet is where strength grows roots. Sometimes I look at these hands of mine. They are knotted now, veins rising like rivers under thin skin. They've cooked thousands of meals, scrubbed floors until they shined, and stitched clothes when money was too tight for new ones. They've buried loved ones, held babies, wiped tears, and once, they clawed through smoke and dirt to escape death itself, and when I look at them, I think, these hands may be old, but they are not weak. That's what I want you to understand, my darling. People will tell you otherwise. The world will try to convince you that your worth depends on your youth, your beauty, your speed, or your strength. They'll look at someone like me and see nothing but frailty. But they don't see what I carry inside. Strength doesn't come from muscle or money. It comes from love, from faith, from the stubborn refusal to let go of what's right, even when the world tries to tear it from you. That's what got me out of that fire. That's what pushed me to walk into the sheriff's office with trembling hands and proof hidden in my Bible. And that's what I hope you'll carry in your own heart long after I'm gone. I've seen the best of people, and I've seen the worst. I've watched a man I trusted like a son try to kill me for money. I've watched justice rise from ashes when it seemed impossible. But more than anything, I've watched love endure through every storm. Your mama's laughter, your small hand slipping into mine, the way your eyes light up when you hear a story, that's the kind of wealth no thief can touch. Promise me something, sweetheart. Promise me you'll never measure your worth in dollars or diamonds. Those things shine bright, but they fade fast. Measure it in kindness, measure it in truth, measure it in the way people feel safe when they're near you, the way they know they can trust you, because at the end of a long life, no one remembers the numbers in your bank account. They remember the way your love made them feel less alone. I want you to remember, too, that age is not the enemy. Getting older is a blessing, one not everyone is given. Each year is proof you've kept walking, kept breathing, kept fighting. Don't ever let anyone tell you you're too old for something that matters to you. If I had believed that lie, I'd have died in that cabin, my voice silenced, my truth buried. Instead, I walked out of the fire carrying proof, carrying hope, and carrying the will to see justice done. One day, when you're grown, you'll face your own trials. They won't look like mine. Maybe no burning cabins or hidden bank accounts, but they'll be heavy all the same. And when they come, I want you to hear my voice in the back of your mind. Don't quit. Don't let fear have the last word. Stand tall, even if your knees are shaking. Because if an old woman with smoke in her lungs and fire at her back could crawl her way to freedom, then, my darling, you can face whatever the world puts in your path. There's something else I need you to know. Forgiveness, it's not easy and it's not quick. I'll be honest, I don't know if I'll ever forgive that man for what he did. Some wounds cut too deep to heal in this lifetime. But I've learned this. Forgiveness isn't about excusing the wrong. It's about refusing to let hate take root in your heart. Hate is heavy, and I've carried enough burdens already. So I choose to set it down, even if I never speak his name again. That's the legacy I want to leave with you, not bitterness, not fear, but strength wrapped in love, because love, darling, is the only thing that truly lasts. So when I'm gone, and you sit in this chair with the evening light spilling through the window, I hope you'll remember the sound of my voice, the feel of my wrinkled hand holding yours. I hope you'll remember that even in the darkest moments, there was always a way forward, always a flicker of hope if you were willing to crawl toward it. That's my gift to you, child. Not money, not property, not jewels. My gift is this story, this truth, this reminder that you come from a line of people who don't quit. Your blood carries resilience, your heart carries love, and as long as you hold on to those, you'll never be poor, no matter what the world tries to take from you. Now give me your little hand, there feel that my grip may be soft, but it's steady. And one day when you're old and your hands are wrinkled like mine, I hope you'll hold someone younger and pass this same strength along. That's how we keep going, generation after generation, not with riches or empires, but with love, truth, and the courage to keep standing when the world tries to knock us down. That, my darling, is the legacy I leave you. And I pray you'll carry it proudly, long after this old voice of mine has faded into silence.